There are very few things that frustrate me more than an unanswered question. An unanswered question just bothers me. It aggravates me. It pushes me to a place sometimes of a place where I'm just frustrated. What's even more frustrating for me is when there is a question that is posed and there is a response, but that response is not an answer to the question that I asked. And this happens to each and every one of us. In the midst of a conversation, you pose a question, and yet someone responds and they say everything but the thing that you wanted to hear. I get this so often. I won't say how, but I will say that I get to the point where I'm just like, can you just answer me directly? When you ask a question, there is this expectation that the answer that you get will not just be an answer, but it will be helpful to the question that you asked. And when we are in trouble, or we're in pain, or we're in dark places, or we find ourselves under the thumbprint of oppression, we call out to God and ask him very specific questions, believing we will get what? Very specific answers. I haven't been following God nearly as long as some of you have. And yet, it did not take me long to understand that that's usually not how God responds. That if you have a question for God, even if your back is against the wall, even if it's an emergency situation, even if you feel like you have been treated badly, even if you feel like you've been abused, the questions you have for God are not usually quickly answered. And if they are, they're not usually answered in the way that you most desire. As we see Daniel coming out of Daniel chapter 7, still in oppression. Daniel coming out of Daniel chapter 7, still being under the thumbprint of this radical, crazy kingdom of Babylon. He has questions for God. He has desires that God knows of. And yet God does not answer his question in the way that he would probably desire. Instead, he sends him a few dreams and visions that he has a hard time making sense of. And I'll preface with that because we could spend all day. I could put charts up and timelines and have a laser and a highlighter and do that all day. And there's still things that are in Daniel chapter 8 and 7 and 9 and 10 that you will not understand on this side of glory. And that's not the point. God is trying to answer a question for us that each of us have deep down inside, and yet we've asked a question that are based in our own desires. We would like to know exactly when and how and where and why, and yet God is trying to answer a deeper need that we have, and the same is true for Daniel. So here we have Daniel trying to figure out the pieces of the puzzle that come with this vision. This is Daniel carrying the weight of the revelation that he's received. He's received an answer from God as he's prayed for many years, but the answer does not make him shout. Instead, it makes him sick. And are you prepared for it? Answers like that? When you sit and you pray to God, are you prepared for the answer that will not make you shout and instead it'll make you sick? Do you really want to hear the truth? You can't handle the truth. Sometimes that's how God positions himself. Now, how can that be? If he is a good God who gives good gifts to his people, why would he not give me exactly what I want? Well, guess what, David? I want cookies every day. Would a good God give me cookies every day just because that's what I desire? No, because that's not always what's best for me. That's not what God is trying to mold me into in the moment. See, God's answers are above our desires, and yet they are still good. Now, before digging through Daniel chapter 8 and talking through the prophecy and the apocalyptic literature that's there, let me just give a short breakdown about what prophecy is and what the apocalypse is. Prophecy is simply a message from God. It's a message from God. I made that very simple, and it may be too simplistic, but let me tell you why. Because so often we can get bogged down with all of these things that come with prophecy, and we think prophecy is just someone fortune telling for God. You could be Miss Cleo for God, and that's prophecy. But if you Miss Cleo without God, then that's witchcraft. That's not what prophecy is. You know the reason I know that? The reason all of us can know that is because when God is speaking to Abram and he gives Abram a message to give to the king, he calls Abram what? A prophet. That when God whispers the truth to his people and he tells them to tell someone else of that truth, that is called prophecy. Here in Daniel, we get a lot of prophecy. Chapters 1 through 7, it gives us a lot of prophecy because God speaks to Daniel, his prophet, and he tells Daniel to go share this with King Nebuchadnezzar and his son and all of these different people. Daniel is a prophet, not because he's trying to tell you the future, but because he's trying to tell you what God said. And if you want to test a real prophet, don't ask them about the future. Ask them about their connection with God. You need to be sure that those people are actually hearing. This ain't in my notes, y'all. You need to be sure that these people are actually hearing from God. That anyone who would say something different than what God would say, and you got a basis for what God would say here, is not a prophet. You're a false prophet. But also, in Daniel chapter 8, much of what we see is what we call apocalyptic literature. And that sounds crazy. It sounds like something that's in Star Trek, Star Wars, something. The world's going to end. When you think apocalypse, you think the world's going to end. That's not what apocalypse means. The word apocalypse simply means to uncover or to reveal. So those things that are apocalyptic are not to, again, strictly tell you about the end times, or to give you an opportunity to write out a chart of when Jesus is coming back. That's not the purpose. The purpose is to uncover or to reveal something that God is trying to deposit in you for right now. Now, here's the thing. Prophecy and apocalyptic literature might lead you to something that's happening in the future. But the focus is God loving you and leading you in this season right now. Now, if you are a person who reads and you're looking for something happening in the future, and your only hope comes from God doing it in the future, then you might miss the fact that prophecy is to bless you right now. If you're one who's building bunkers and listen, I'm not going to, all right, let me stay right here. God wants to bless you with words from God right now. And yes, sometimes prophecy warns, and other times prophecy comforts. Some prophecy reveals what God is going to do in the future, but a lot of prophecy reveals what God is doing behind the scenes right now. So when we read Daniel chapter 8, the point is not merely to decode the symbols. The point is to feel the burden that Daniel feels and to receive the faith that Daniel is being blessed with. God is telling Daniel, more trouble is coming. Don't get it twisted. More trouble is coming. More people will suffer. Your worship will be attacked. The truth will be thrown down, and yet evil will not prevail forever. Can you deal with that? In your life right now, if you come to see the pastor and you lay everything down, and we've done this before, people, look, this is my situation, and you know, I got this and I got that, and I got this and I got that. And if I sat in front of you and said, hey, listen, you're going to have more bills that are not going to be paid. You're going to have more nights in the dark. You're going to have more sleepless nights where you tossing and turning. You're going to have more issues with your coworkers. You're going to have more fights with your spouse. There's going to be more evil that's going to happen to you in your life. And yet, God is not going to allow evil to last forever. Is that a comforting message to you? Or is that a scary one? Because I can't lie, I've had plenty of nights. Last night was one of them where I could not sleep and I'm tossing and turning and I'm praying to God and I want God to give me a melatonin right now in my spirit. I don't need to be up for 3 or 4 more days. I need him to do something now. And yet God so often will tell you, it's not today, it's not tomorrow, it's not next week, but I am coming. And evil will not last forever. So here's the simple explanation of Daniel chapter 8. This is so simple. As a matter of fact, we got a graphic up here so you can see it. Here's a simple version, right? Daniel has a vision. And Daniel's vision is a vision of a ram, a goat, and a lot of little horns. It's kind of crazy how many horns are in this story. But I'll explain why in a second. See, as we talked about the vision that Daniel had last chapter, Daniel chapter 7, of these 4 beasts, right? These 4 beasts represent kingdoms. And those kingdoms are coming against God's people. And when those kingdoms come against God's people suffer. And you would think that if God says, I'm going to make things okay, that each kingdom would lessen in their abuse of God's people. But it's actually the opposite. That each kingdom gets worse and worse and worse. And God is like, yo, but I'm still coming. Hold on. Right? And this vision in Daniel chapter 8 is really an extension of the vision we see in Daniel chapter 7. And guess what? The dream that we saw in Daniel chapter 2. Y'all remember that dream? The dream that Nebuchadnezzar had of this statue that is built so high. And it's gold and silver and all of these different things. And they are to represent the kingdoms of this world. But ultimately, what happens to the statue? It is knocked to the ground. And the rock that comes from heaven is the one that knocks it to the ground. Daniel chapter 8 is an extension to that. So even though I said we don't need no charts, let me do some chart work. The ram usually has 2 horns. Now this ram has 2 horns, but the horns are not the same size. And what this represents is the Medo-Persian Empire. Somebody say Medo-Persian. No, Medo with an M. Medo-Persian empires. There was a place called Media, and Media had this grand army that took over much of the land that was in that place at the time. And actually, Media had a more powerful empire because of its military than Persia did. But the empires came up around the same time. So what we refer to it, we often say Medo-Persian. But see, the ram has 2 horns and one is longer than the other because of this. The Medo Empire, although it came up first, it was not the more powerful one. The Persian Empire ended up being the more powerful of the 2, which is why this ram has one longer horn than the other. But then there's the goat. Y'all see the goat? That's a crazy looking goat. This goat is to represent an empire that would come soon. The Greco Empire, the empire of Greece. And it has a great horn that comes out of the front, and it represents its power and its might. And if you know anything about history, there's a man named Alexander the Great who was able to take over more land in 10 years than any other conqueror has. The goat represents this empire. And that horn represents this leader that is powerful. And yet, that horn will be broken off. Alexander the Great died in his 30s, just after conquering much of the land that he conquered. And yet, after that, the empire was split into 4, which represents these horns that are right here. And Daniel sees that God's people will not only see all of these horrific things, but they will face seasons where the power that's there will come against them. And they will have to hold on. See, the main point of this is not merely historical. The main point of this is spiritual. And that's why God shows up in this way, in a vision, not to warn them that these empires are coming. They already knew that they were coming. And guess what? there was nothing they could do about it anyway. Right? Like, let's just stop and think about the fact that we are mere mortals. If there is an alien attack that's going to happen on the world right now, and you find out about it, what you gonna do anyway? God ain't giving you that so that you could go and get all the toilet paper at Dollar General. God is trying to speak to something that's inside of you. That if something beyond your imagination comes your way, that if something beyond your power, or something that would make you even more powerless comes your way, are you still going to sit in faith? Or are you going to worry? Are you going to be okay being on the boat as it shakes? Or are you going to run and try to jump off? Are you okay when you see the clouds forming? Or are you freaking out? This is the message that he's bringing. Daniel receives this message. And here's the bulk of the message. Truth is coming and trouble is coming as well. Trouble is coming, but the end of trouble is coming as well. And one will outpace the other. But you must endure both. And that's the tension of the chapter. God gives him an answer, but it's not the answer that he wants. So what happens in your life when you get the answer that trouble is coming, and yet the end of trouble is coming too? You must hold both of them. You must hold both of them. And that's what I would love for us to all walk away with, that we must hold both of those truths at the same time. That God sometimes gives answers that are heavier than our own questions. Daniel is not casually observing this vision. He is overwhelmed by this vision. He sees power rising. He sees kingdoms chasing after him. He sees violence and a ruler who attacks people who stand with God. He sees worship being disrupted. He sees the throne being pushed down towards the ground. And the hardest part that is not here for Daniel's imagination is that this is revelation of things that he knows deep down inside will happen. Sometimes not knowing is hard, but other times knowing is even harder. We often assume that if God would just tell us what is going on, tell us what's happening, that we would feel better. But Daniel chapter 8 is the example that challenges that assumption. Daniel gets the answer, and the answer leaves him undone. See, for some of us, praying for clarity is a call for help. And yet, sometimes clarity is not what we want. It's peace. Sometimes we don't need more detail. Sometimes we need more ability to just sit and trust God. It's just like the song that we sang, that we should want nothing else but him. And when we say nothing else but him, yes, we know he is a rescuer, but what if he does not rescue you this time? Do you still want him? You can know that God is in control. And Daniel shows you, knowing him being in control, you could still be burdened. You could know that evil will not win and still be grieved by evil. You can know that injustice will happen and still be disrupted by injustice. You can know that God has an end and an appointed time and still struggle with what might happen. Sometimes the answer does not lighten the load. Sometimes the answer explains why the load is so heavy. This is what we see in Daniel chapter 8. That God's answer reveals the road ahead. And as it does, it reveals it to be harder and harder. That's our second point. God's answer for you. God's answer for you. It may reveal the road being harder and harder ahead. The vision does not tell Daniel everything he needs to know. It just pushes him back into the fact that he does not have power himself. And when we are in those positions where we are not yet healed and not yet restored and not yet having things resolved and not yet delivered, and we don't have clarity, and we're not yet at home, how are we responding to God? Daniel is being asked to live with an answer that still requires him to suffer. This is one of the hardest paths of our faith. It's one thing to wait when you do not know what God is doing. It's another thing to wait knowing how painful it will be. If you've ever sat in a waiting room getting ready for a surgery, you know what that anxiety is like. That you know that there is going to be something that happens to your body, and it will take recovery, and it will hurt, it will be painful, and yet you still have to sit and wait. And many of us are going through surgery right now, spiritually. And we are sitting in the waiting room of surgery in our lives, and we are waiting for something that will hurt, but it will help ultimately. The hardest waiting is not always waiting for an answer. Sometimes the hardest waiting is waiting with an answer that we wish was different. As we keep moving and feeling what Daniel's feeling in Daniel chapter 8, we can also see this, that God gives enough to sustain faith, not always enough to satisfy curiosity. Look at Daniel as he gets these answers, as he sees this vision, he gets enough so that he might hold on a little bit longer. He gets enough to know that God is on the way. And yet it does not satisfy his curiosity. Point number 3. Daniel receives the interpretation. Actually, what's interesting, if you go and read all of Daniel chapter 8, Daniel has an angel to bring him the interpretation. How much more spiritual can you be? That God actually sends an angel to you. And this has happened to some of you, and you probably have not admitted it yet. That God has actually done supernatural things to give you the answer to your question. And yet, guess what? You still got to wait. That he's not so much worried about satisfying our curiosity as he is riling up our faith again. Daniel receives the interpretation. He's looking. And that matters because Gabriel explains the vision to him. If you go to Daniel 8, verse 27, you see this. Look at it. It says, I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for days. Then I got up and went about the king's business. And I was greatly disturbed by the vision and could not understand it. What is he saying? That boy was sick to his stomach. Have you been there? Have you been in that place? Where it feels like you are so heavy that you can't roll out of bed. Where whatever is holding you down, it feels so heavy that you feel like you cannot do. Going to work is hard. Driving down the street is hard. Eating is hard. Everything becomes hard when you hear the truth from God and you still must wait. So Daniel, he receives real revelation, but not comprehension at first. And it's not until after he receives the interpretation that he's waiting. That God gives Daniel enough to know that God is still sovereign, but not enough to make Daniel feel like he's in control. That is often how God deals with us. He gives us enough to light our obedience, but not always enough to fill us with comfort. He gives enough for truth to be held on to, but not always enough to keep our minds from wandering. Faith is not built on having all the details. Faith is built on trusting God who does have all the details. Are you ready? Are you ready for that type of holding on? Some of us think peace will come when we have understanding, but biblical peace does not come from mastering the details of God's plan. Matter of fact, it's Jesus who would say, hey, the peace I give to you is peace that the world can't give to you. And the world tries to explain things. The world tries to give you all the details. The world tries to comfort you by letting you know that everything will work out in the way that you would desire for it to be. And yet God says, I give you my peace. Are you okay with his peace? Not a peace that he has designed in you, not a peace that he's put together for you, not a peace that he's grabbed things and molded them to give to you as a gift. His own peace is what holds each and every one of the believers of Jesus. Daniel does not understand everything, but he knows this: the evil has its limits. God is sovereign. And at the end, all things will be good. So as we wrap up, let me give you one last point that you can get from Daniel chapter 8. And this, I believe, is the most important, because this is what we do when we receive the answer that we were not anticipating. We have to stand in faithfulness. See, faithfulness is carrying the burden and still showing up. Faithfulness is carrying the burden and still showing up. Look at the example of Daniel in verse 27. I, Daniel, was overcome, throwing up, sick out of my mind. And guess what he did? He got up. The most holy thing I can tell some of y'all is, hey, keep going. Get your butt up and let's go. Like, keep going to work. Keep showing up. Keep showing up in your marriage. Keep showing up in your friendships. Keep showing up in community. Keep showing up when anxiety comes up. Keep showing up. I know it makes you sick to your stomach. Keep showing up. Because in your showing up, you are saying more about your belief in God than you are saying about your belief in the circumstances changing. Daniel says, I was overcome. I laid down sick for days. Then I rose and went to do the king's business. And that's not a neat ending, but that's a faithful ending. That's not a perfect ending, but it's an honest ending in faith. Daniel is not skipping around Babylon saying, I got a word from the Lord, y'all, and stuff gonna change. I only got to hold on for a little bit longer. No. He just continues on in his faithfulness. And that's what faithfulness looks like. It's showing up every single day. It's believing God every single day. It's holding on every single day, no matter whether you know it's going to ruin your life or not. Faithfulness is not pretending that the burden is light. Faithfulness is not acting like hard things are easy. Faithfulness is not having all of the answers. It's not saying that you don't experience grief or weakness or pain. Faithfulness is receiving what God has shown you and carrying that until he shows you something else. Some of the most faithful people in this room are not the people who feel strong. They're the people who have refused to not believe in God. Daniel got up. He went about the king's business. And my call to each and every one of us is that we will continue to get up and be about the king's business. Because look, the king wants you to know you'll be okay. The king wants you to know the evil will not overtake you. The king wants you to know that he is faithful and he will never leave you nor forsake you. And yet, if Daniel was just waiting for God to knock down the door in Babylon and to rescue him, to pick him up and walk him out of that place and drop him back in Jerusalem, he would have waited and waited and waited all his life only to be disappointed. But Daniel's hope was not in a man walking through those doors. Daniel's hope was that same vision, that the Ancient of Days, the Son of Man, would be on the throne. And ultimately, there would be a man who would go about in his faithfulness and do the king's business. And he would hold both the answer that evil will get worse and the answer that evil will not overtake him. And he would be stretched wide on a cross with that truth. He would die so that you would not have to go through this life without the ultimate answer of who will save you. He died so that you would know the answer, that he has saved you. This man who's far greater than Daniel and far greater than us His name is Jesus. And he died so that as you wait, you will know he is indeed with you. So whatever you're going through right now, let Daniel chapter 8 and all of the Bible be your reminder. Things might not get better. He may not come when you want him, but he'll be here right